Berlusconi changed and reshaped Italian society. Through his television and his time as prime minister, he kind of gave Italians a license to be more.
What was he like as a man, as a person?
Well, if he felt comfortable around you and he felt he could trust you, then Berlusconi, if he admitted you to his inner circle, then he could be charming, he could be amusing, self-deprecating. He also liked to brag a lot. If he thought you were his friend, he would brag endlessly about many things. And he was the sort of person who had charisma, but his stories repeated themselves. So the first time you heard them, they were funny. The second time you smiled. The third, fourth, fifth, sixth time he told the same stories, it was repetitive. He was a man who basically was used to getting his way. He was surrounded by people who tended to say yes as much as anything else to him.
Even this year, he was in the list of the richest people in Italy. I think the third richest person in Italy. How did he amass that enormous fortune?
Well, remember that before he was a politician, Berlusconi made a fortune first in the real estate market in the late 70s in Milan, building satellite cities that were copied from Britain, from British satellite cities, and making a fortune. And then, most of all, in the 80s, he set up the Canale 5 television network, and he eventually grew the only large commercial private TV network and was able to make a fortune with that, billions of dollars, billions of euros.
Mm. So was he a very clever man, or was he in the right place at the right time with the right amount of charm?
He was very shrewd. I wouldn't say he was at all an intellectual, although he could quote some opera and he could quote some of the Latins and the Greeks, but he was fairly crude as a person. He wasn't a terribly sophisticated person, and he was shrewd, and he was able to use politics in the 80s also to get favorable legislation that allowed him to build up his television empire. That was very important, and that was because of his friendship with former Prime Minister Bettino Craxi. So there was always a lot of scandal surrounding all of this, but it was really as a politician that Berlusconi changed and reshaped Italian society. Through his television and his time as Prime Minister, he kind of gave Italians a license to be more relaxed, and he didn't really reform any of the institutions. He didn't bring the kind of reforms that Italy needed for its economy the way Margaret Thatcher did in Britain or Gerhard Schröder did in Germany in the early 2000s. So Berlusconi spent more time and power worrying about his legal trials and corruption trials than governing Italy.
So why did the electorate forgive him? Because we've been talking about this extraordinary figure of 2,500 court appearances over 20 years. It's a huge cost to him. How come the electorate didn't turn against him?
Well, today, as we discuss this, it's probably helpful to think of the American example. Why is it that nearly 40 or 50% of the American Republican Party, or even more, supports Donald Trump even more now that he's been indicted on criminal charges and doesn't believe that the charges are real? The same thing happened with Berlusconi, and he cried witch hunt long before Trump made the phrase fashionable. He used the paranoid tactics of mass politics to become the first populist. Anything that was negative for him was a plot against him. Anything that was positive was his achievement.
Can I just ask one question about his apparent closeness to President Putin, who's paid rather a warm tribute to him today?
Yeah, well, they were buddies. And they met in 2001 at the G8 summit in Genoa. And Berlusconi thought he could play an important role bringing Putin together with George W. Bush and He's gone around for years. He told me when I was writing the biography, I put an end to the Cold War. It was thanks to me. What he did was he stood in a photo opportunity at a conference of NATO in 2001 between Putin and Bush, and he carried messages back and forth between Bush and Putin as a sort of broker, as a messenger between the two in that early part of this century. But he went on a holiday with Putin right after we finished the book. I published my biography in 2015. The minute the book was out, he went with Putin to Crimea, to occupied Crimea, which the Russians had just illegally seized. And he told me he had great wines, delicious vintage wines that Putin showed him in Crimea. He's been an apologist and some would say a mouthpiece for Putin in recent years. And he bragged a few months ago about Putin sending him vodka for his birthday. This is while we're in the middle of genocide going on in Ukraine. And Berlusconi bragged and said he sent him some nice Italian red wine back. So Berlusconi, if we say